Chairperson, distinguished guests, faculty and students of the Columbia University, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I thank the School of International and Public Affairs for the invitation to speak at this forum and for your kind words of introduction. I understand that last year, Columbia University celebrated its 250th anniversary. Let me extend, albeit belatedly, sincere congratulations to the entire university community. It is fascinating that a 250 years old, at 250 years old, Columbia is still growing strong and maintaining its exemplary standard of academic excellence. There are few countries in the world whose leaders in public life, business, science, and the humanities have not had some association with Columbia University. Indeed, there is hardly any country that has not benefited from Columbia's outstanding contribution to knowledge. Over the years, many Sierra Leoneans too have been fortunate enough to be a part of this fine institution, both as students and staff. Incidentally, my son obtained his master's degree in this university. It is an honor to be here at Columbia University and to speak at the World Leaders Forum this morning. I thank you for this singular honor. This forum serves as a center for open dialogue with world leaders, but I believe it also provides a friendly environment for learning. In other words, it provides an opportunity for us to share with the audience some lessons learned in such areas as war and peace, economic and social development, and international cooperation. We in Sierra Leone have learned many challenging lessons over the past 14 years. I would like to share with you a few, namely conflict management and post-conflict development. It is our experience in resolving conflicts and literally building a bridge between post-conflict recovery and sustainable development. While taking you through conflict, we reflect and finally to development in this weapon-free comfort zone of Columbia University. I look forward to learning through exchange of views on these matters. You may be aware that Sierra Leone has endured a decade-long internal conflict in the 1990s that unleashed a campaign of unimaginable bloodshed and devastation. I will not recount here in full detail the extraordinary brutality and immense suffering visited upon the people of my country during the course of the conflict, which left hundreds of thousands dead and many more grotesquely maimed. The conflict also devastated our infrastructure. As a result, this senseless violence and wanton destruction, the conflict in Sierra Leone became internationally known for its horrific atrocities, particularly the widespread amputation of civilians and sexual violence perpetrated against innocent women and children. Prior to the outbreak of the armed conflict, Sierra Leone was not only a developing country, but also one of the least developed in the world. It still is. Here, the 11-year rebel conflict only exacerbated an already fragile economy. However, the killing and maiming were abated, and the guns silenced by our commitment to end the conflict and the will of the people for a return to democratic governance. Today, one of our greatest achievements is our adherence to the tenets of democracy and the rule of law. Upon assuming the presidency in March 1996, my own personal experience in post-conflict recovery as a UNDP representative and resident coordinator of the United Nations system in East and Southern Africa was put to the test in my own country. I inherited a severely battered nation. I was conscious of my political, constitutional, and also moral obligation to strive hard and exert every effort to bring an early end to the war. The population had already become war-weary, and in spirit of my knowledge of the state of our military and its inability to prosecute the war against the rebels, I made the ending of the war my campaign pledge. I made this pledge in the belief that by negotiations and sound reasoning, I would be able to talk the rebels out of their hostile activities against the population and persuade them to enter into negotiations with a view to concluding a peace agreement with them. In fact, the only option I saw available to me then was to embark on negotiations with the rebels. Accordingly, that is the approach that I pursued immediately after my inauguration, despite the existing problems concerning the capability of the military and the fact that I was elected president against the background of increasing confidence of the eventual ascendancy to power of the rebel group known as the Revolutionary United Front, RUF. A cross-section of my people, including the print media, was against negotiations with the rebels. But I knew that the then army, not the people, had lost the war, and since the people were not combatants in the strict sense of the word, I convinced them into talking with the rebels. It was an uphill task. The area's manifest hostility towards my government had been further increased by our insistence on elections before peace. This caused the RUF a considerable sense of frustration. Both of these factors, though not fatal, will prove to weaken the bargaining position of my government when it entered the Abidjan peace talks with the RUF rebels in late 1996. In Abidjan, a comprehensive peace agreement was concluded in spite of the acrimony engendered by the rebels during the negotiations. The agreement called for, among other things, the total and immediate cessation of hostilities, the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of all combatants, and the provision of an amnesty for the RUF members. The people of Sierra Leone welcomed the signing of this agreement, as they regarded the accord as the end of their woes and suffering, and expected that it would restore lasting peace and stability to the country. It soon turned out, however, that the people and the government had in fact been deceived by the RAF. The message from the rebel leader, intercepted by the government only days after the signing of the agreement, clearly showed that the RAF did not enter the peace negotiations in good faith and had no desire to abide by the terms of the resulting peace agreement. In that message, Fode Sankoh, the rebel leader, had communicated with his deputy, the field commander Sam Bokri, alias Mosquita, that he had agreed to participate in the negotiation and to sign the peace agreement only as a pretext to relieve himself of the pressure of the international community, that he never intended to abide by its terms. In the same message, he ordered his commanders to resume hostilities even with greater ferocity. Indeed, the ceasefire which then prevailed was unilaterally broken by the RAF immediately after the signing of the agreement, a clear indication that the Abidjan Agreement was doomed to fail. Attacks on civilians by the RAF stepped up over time. In March 1997, military officers adopted the name Armed Forces Revolutionary Council in collaboration with the RAF rebels and staged a bloody coup in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. My government went into exile in neighboring Guinea, from where we operated, and mobilized international support for the immediate and unconditional restoration of democratic rule. The people of Sierra Leone overwhelmingly rejected the coup, some with their lives. In response to the RAF intransigence and its increasing brutality against civilians, Nigerian-led Economic Community Monitoring Observer Group, ECOMOG, troops launched an offensive in February 1998 to dislodge the junta. The joint AFRC-RAF fighters were forced out of Freetown, and my government was thereafter restored. During the intervention by ECOMOG, however, many of the AFRC and RAF forces escaped to the remote hinterlands of the country and intensified their activities predominantly in the diamond mining areas. There, they were able to mine diamonds, which they exchanged cheaply for weapons with which they armed themselves to the teeth. This enabled them to regroup and attack the capital in January 1999, slaughtering thousands of civilians and virtually razing the city in a matter of days. This level of mayhem and destruction further awakens genuine international awareness to the plight of the civilian population. That incursion accelerated the dire need for the peace process. In collaboration with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, the international community was now willing to intervene, at least diplomatically, and they, together with the government, were now determined to find a workable and lasting solution to the rebel menace in the country. This led to the commencement of the dialogue, which resulted in the Lome Peace Agreement of 1999. The initial stage of the dialogue was set when I was invited to Lome in Togo to sign a ceasefire agreement with the rebel leader Fode Sankoh in March 1999. I did this amidst a lot of misgivings from the people of Sierra Leone, from the bitter experience they had had regarding Fode Sankoh's attitude to the Abidjan Peace Accord. They, on the one hand, preferred an all-out war against the rebels and an attainment of peace by their defeat in battle. I, on the other hand, was aware of the handicaps and the limitations of the government to proceed that way. I was also aware of the pending restoration of a democratically elected government in Nigeria, as a result of which the continued stay of the Nigerian contingent in ECOMOG in Sierra Leone, which was by far the largest, could not be guaranteed. Above all else, I could no longer stomach the killing of innocent Sierra Leoneans. Thus, I chose the path of dialogue again, but this time careful to avoid the pitfalls and weaknesses in the Abidjan Peace Accord. Along the lines of the Abidjan Peace Agreement, the Lome Peace Accord included a blanket amnesty for combatants and provided for disarmament and demobilization and the reintegration of human rights and truth and reconciliation commissions. The parties also agreed to the deployment of a neutral United Nations peacekeeping force. Most notably, it also included a power-sharing arrangement among the elected government, the RUF, and rebels and the AFRC. The RUF leader for the Sanko was accorded a status that was similar to that of the vice president and chairmanship of the important commission for the management of strategic mineral resources and national reconstruction and development. The AFRC leader, Johnny Paul Koroma, was appointed chairman of the Disarmament and Reintegration Committee. With these arrangements, expectations were high that Sierra Leone had turned the corner and was on its way to lasting peace and stability. On January 18, 2002, Sierra Leoneans breathed a sigh of joyous relief. For that memorable day marked the formal end of the brutal conflict. We set ourselves specific goals in pursuit of sustainable peace and national development. We shared the view that a peaceful and stable environment is a sine qua non for national development and by extension for achieving the Millennium Development Goals. The starting point was disarmament and reintegration of combatants. By mid-2004, a total of 72,490 combatants were disarmed and 71,043 demobilized, including 6,845 child soldiers. By the same period, 55,122 ex-combatants had received support for their reintegration into active community life. Also, most of the formerly internally displaced persons and refugees were repatriated and resettled. Indeed, the war that killed our people and ravaged our country had become a thing of the past. However, in order to ensure that the long peace is consolidated, government embarked on sustainable reforms in the security sector. The underlying strategy is to transform the security sector so that it is not only capable of responding adequately to threats to the state and citizenry, but also to provide the enabling environment to fight poverty and pursue the goals of national development. This is particularly significant as what was once a 17,000 personnel strong UN peacekeeping force UNAMSTEL, is scheduled to depart from Sierra Leone within 3 months. That is by the end of this year. As I pursued the peace process, I was also cognizant of the fact that Sierra Leoneans were anxious not only to have peace, but also to realize sooner rather than later concrete dividends from from the restoration of a democracy, of a democratic government, which they had obtained after much toil and suffering. We were constantly reminding ourselves that lack of development breeds conflict and insecurity. How then do you keep the peace and maintain security under those circumstances? While regarding peace and security as being paramount, we never abandoned our relief and development responsibilities. To this end, one of the most successful of our post-conflict initiatives was the establishment of a National Commission for Reconstruction, Resettlement, and Rehabilitation, the 3 R's as we called it. While it was evidently a response to the humanitarian development goals, in particular for the rural areas which bore the brunt of rebel aggression, the NCRRR was in effect a bridge between the demand for immediate humanitarian relief and the equally important need to prepare for a resumption of economic development activities that had been ruthlessly disrupted by the rebel war. After all, people cannot remain or depend on humanitarian relief indefinitely. Moving from relief to development, the RRR Commission was transformed into the National Commission for Social Action, NACSA. NACSA could be described as the motive force for our post-conflict development. It is a showpiece in post-conflict transition. While assuming responsibility for the previous Reconstruction, Resettlement, and Rehabilitation program, NACSA also coordinates funding for projects that promote economic growth and sustainable development. Working directly with local communities, it supports projects and programs in such areas as water and sanitation, shelter, public works, including feeder roads, agriculture, fisheries, education, and microfinancing. With almost 1,100 projects implemented, the ultimate objective of NACSA is linked to our poverty reduction strategy. As stated above, even before the war, poverty in Sierra Leone had become endemic and pervasive. By 1990, statistics indicate that those close to 4/5 of the population lived below the poverty line of $1 a day. In addition to income poverty, a large portion of the population lacked access to basic social services, including health care, education, potable water, and sanitation. The war merely exacerbated the depth and severity of poverty, causing the living conditions of the majority to further deteriorate. Following the election in 1996, my government began efforts to combat widespread poverty. We began by identifying 5 broad development priorities. 1, security and war-related issues such as disarmament, demobilization, reintegration and resettlement, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. 2, education. 3, good governance and justice. 4, agriculture and food security. And 5, health, with an emphasis on primary health care. And in order to address these broad developmental priorities, we devised a poverty reduction strategy in the form of an interim poverty reduction strategy paper, which was completed in 2001. This strategy was designed to support the transition from peacekeeping to peace building and from relief to equitable and sustainable development. It called for a two-phase implementation strategy, a transition period, 2001 to 2002, and a medium-term phase, 2003 to 2005. While the transition period focused on immediate post-war reconstruction, resettlement, and security challenges, the medium-term phase addressed long-term development strategy for poverty reduction within the context of the preparation of a full poverty reduction paper, PRSP. In addition, my government also provided for the implementation of a National Recovery Strategy, NRS, which was prepared and launched in October 2002. It focused on A, the consolidation of state authority and peace building, B, promotion of reconciliation and the enforcement of human rights, C, facilitating resettlement and reintegration and rebuilding communities, D, facilitating access to previously inaccessible areas, and E, stimulating economic recovery. The NRS represented the combined efforts of government and development partners and essentially served as a bridge between emergency humanitarian assistance and longer-term development challenges. Both the IPRSP and the NRS were successfully implemented during 2001 to 2004, with my government allocating significant budgetary resources to fund critical poverty reduction activities, particularly in the social sectors of health, education, water, and sanitation. This resulted in sustained recovery of the economy during the period 2001 to 2004. Real GDP grew by 5.4% in 2001, 6.3% in 2002, 6.5% in 2003, and 6.4% in 2004. To consolidate these gains, government adopted bold economic and structural reforms geared towards sustaining the recovery and improving overall financial management and service delivery. Other reform measures have included A, improving the strengthening policy making, budget planning and execution, B, improving the capacity for accounting and reporting, C, reforming the public procurement process, D, enhancing revenue collection and mechanisms through the creation of a national revenue authority, and C and E, public sector reform generally. In order to achieve greater efficiency in the management of public finances and to ensure that public enterprises better serve the public of Sierra Leone, we established a Public Enterprise Privatization Commission to oversee and monitor the operations of state enterprises and recommend their privatization where appropriate. Beyond that, we have been preoccupied with institutional development as a means of not only expanding the institutional space, but also of modernizing our institutions so that they can provide efficient service. Currently, Sierra Leone is aggressively pursuing a new strategic direction to build towards the MDG targets. It has formulated a 2005 to 2007 PRSP, which provides bold sectoral policies and institutional reforms to achieve economic growth, provide food security, job opportunities, basic social services, and efficient social security nets. It proposes actions to address A, short-term living conditions, and B, long-term causes of conflict and poverty. The Poverty Reduction Strategy paper constitutes Sierra Leone's first step towards achieving the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. It is oriented towards long-term poverty reduction. It is multi-dimensional and achievable. As we all know, however, neither the ongoing efforts of my government to achieve a meaningful improvement in the welfare of our people, nor our implementation of prudent fiscal and monetary problems can ever be achieved if these efforts are not firmly rooted in a solid framework of democratic practices and good governance. That is why we are vigorously pursuing the goals of good governance through several reform measures aimed at improving the performance and integrity of state institutions, fiscal public sector management, and the quality of public and political leadership. On my assumption of office, my government immediately set up improving the quality of governance and later set up a governance steering committee under the chairmanship of a member of my cabinet. The committee has concentrated its efforts on rebuilding democratic governance through constitutional and institutional reforms, decentralization and local government reforms, public sector and civil service reforms, promotion of human rights, judicial and legal reforms, promotion of accountability and transparency, reduction of the incidence of corruption and abuse of power. In particular, my government views corruption as an impediment to the promotion of good governance. Accordingly, combating endemic corruption is the cornerstone of our good governance program. We have, for the first time in the history of Sierra Leone, appointed an ombudsman whose role is to investigate complaints of abuse and capricious action on the part of public officials. Also, for the first time in our history, and way ahead of other sub-Saharan African countries, we have promulgated an anti-corruption act to combat corruption and established an anti-corruption commission with the mandate to investigate instances of alleged or suspected corruption and to take appropriate action, including recommendations for prosecution. In a bid to stimulate economic development, in the rural areas and to extend democratic participation to the grassroots of the population, the government introduced legislation in early 2004 aimed at promoting decentralization of government services and the re-establishment of elected local government councils. This initiative led to the enactment of the Local Government Act in March 2004. Thereafter, local government elections were held nationwide in May of that year, in which municipal, town, and district councils were elected to replace the hitherto politically appointed management committees that had been in place. These elections took government closer to the local community and considerably empowered them to take control of the management of their own affairs. Another serious source of concern for my government is that of dealing with the dispensation of justice in Sierra Leone. Accordingly, under the guidance of the Chief Justice, the entire judicial and legal system is in the process of being completely overhauled. This activity, which is aimed at developing an effective and efficient legal and judicial system in Sierra Leone, is part of the British-funded Law Development Reform Project. In line with our commitment, we now have a fully functioning Law Reform Commission whose mandate is to review all the laws of our country and to make recommendations regarding the need for the updating, amendment, or repeal of laws. Further, measures have been taken to provide incentive and improve pay and other conditions of service for personnel in the legal service. The cumulative effect of all these public sector reform initiatives is that Sierra Leone is gradually becoming the peaceful and wholesome society that it had been known to be at one time in the past. We are trying to position Sierra Leone among the ranks of leading countries in Africa. We are leaders in addressing corruption. We will be leaders in human rights. We will be leaders in electoral reform. We will be leaders in food security. We must establish this reputation for leadership in order to begin to attract long-term foreign investors. We need foreign investment first in the development of infrastructure. Without adequate energy, telecommunications, transport, and shipping services, we will not attract business investment. We are doing our best to provide a regulatory framework with predictable, consistent, and simple procedures for doing business. Foreign enclaves mark our economic history, especially in the mining and commercial sectors. The business of these sectors must be thoroughly integrated into our national economy. This is usually accomplished through the financial sector, including the banks. We must enable national and foreign investors to lend and borrow money in the local market. The financial links need to be developed between those who have money and those who want to invest money in new businesses. Our banking system is starting to vigorously respond in its services to every district. Now, it must expand the kind of services it provides and become a true hub for financial transactions between leaders, lenders, and borrowers. The microfinance sector is emerging. Financial services needs to expand to include medium-sized loans under commercial banks and must finance agriculture and post-harvest businesses to link agriculture to industry. Private sector growth does not just refer to foreign investment. We're witnessing a most encouraging response by farmers on the various initiatives of farm field schools and agricultural business units. Last year, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Food Security provided seed rice to enable farmers to restore losses during the war and rebuild the acreage necessary for food security. This year, the ministry is purchasing an additional 114,000 bushels of rice, making these 2 years the largest efforts ever for government support to the expansion of rice production. The agricultural business units have pledged to save 20% of their output and make a community contribution of 20% to their local council. The successful harvest in 2005 to 2006 and the commitment of these farmers to their pledges will launch a new era of agricultural business by small farmers. This is an encouraging development in the private sector. We are hopeful that in 2006, this effort will culminate in Sierra Leone becoming once again a rice exporter. The task of achieving our own national development goals and the MDGs is daunting, especially for one of the least developed countries of the world, a country emerging from 11 years of armed conflict. While acknowledging the need to strengthen our capacity for good governance, mobilizing domestic financial institutions, etc., we have to make considerable efforts to create more jobs, to integrate our youth into the economic and social mainstream of society. Here I'm referring to the vast majority who never lifted an AK-47 rifle against anyone. We have learned from experience that unemployment and disadvantaged youths provided a pool of recruits for the rebels. We have therefore created a new Ministry of Youth and Sports to enhance our ability through well-designed projects for meeting the needs of this important segment of the population. In this regard, we have revised our national youth policy. It emphasizes youth empowerment and the mainstreaming of youth activities and concerns as critical inputs in the development process. A major objective is the strengthening of partnership between the public and private sectors to facilitate employment of youth. In coming up with this new policy, we realize that hard-won peace, as well as our efforts for sustainable development, would be seriously jeopardized if we fail to address the youth problem speedily and effectively. We have to eliminate the risks of us sliding back into conflict. The key lies in prevention. We agree with the Secretary General of the United Nations that every step taken towards reducing poverty and achieving broad-based economic growth is a step towards conflict prevention. We must create a culture of prevention, one based on renewed commitment to address in a coordinated and comprehensive manner the problems of economic and social development. I have no doubt whatsoever that this is the best means of ensuring that Sierra Leone does not slide back into violent conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, let me summarize what I believe, based on the Sierra Leone experience and lessons learned, are the key elements for meeting the challenges of post-conflict development. Least developed countries emerging from armed conflict face special problems that require special attention, as well as specialized country-specific solutions. 2, sustained economic and social development is a key to the prevention of armed conflict, and perhaps the best means of preventing the recurrence of violent armed conflict in developing countries like Sierra Leone. 3, useless war-related emergency relief and peacekeeping programs are buttressed by comprehensive development programs, the prospects for lasting peace would be dim. For development as an instrument of conflict prevention and durable peace must also be considered in the context of regional peace and security. For instance, a strong and viable Mana River Union comprising Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone would help significantly and could alleviate most of the problems associated with the conflicts in the sub-region. An equally strong and viable economic community of West African states, focusing on its cooperation and integration, would greatly enhance the capacity of its member states to prevent armed conflict. 5. The concept of reintegration after armed conflict should be redefined. I'm sorry, I think this is the second page. Yes, should be redefined. It should be extended beyond the placement of ex-combatants in occupational and related activities to include the integration of youth in the mainstream of society. And finally, small developing countries have very limited means to defend themselves against serious threats to their security. Unless major powers and collective security arrangements are willing to provide the necessary assistance when these states face serious internal disturbances and/or external aggression, they will be doomed to perpetual turmoil. In the next 2 years, now that we have secured the peace, we will consolidate the peace for future generations by developing Sierra Leone. We will be more strategic. We will be more thorough. We will be more intolerant of corruption. We will protect the rights of women and children. We will secure and improve the education of our boy and girl children. We will continue to offer our youth the chance for literacy, to recover the basic education they missed during the war. We will accelerate the transformation of subsistence farming into surplus farming. We will build ability of our farmers to save and invest in their agricultural businesses. Above all, we will adhere to the tenets of participatory democratic governance and the rule of law. We have come a long way, thanks to the invaluable contribution of every Sierra Leonean in diverse ways and to the support of the international community. Of course, we acknowledge the fact that there is still a long way ahead of us, with commitments and hard work on the part of every Sierra Leonean under the support of friendly countries and institutions. We will achieve the Millennium development goals and targets. Finally, I hope you can appreciate that the path to peace and development can be rugged. However, with determination, patience, people's will, proper focus, and the grace of the Almighty, one is bound to succeed. I thank you for your attention.